to imagine, isn't it? This Lotus 11 is 50 years old and it still looks stunning. It's fantastic to drive too. It was built around the same time that Club Lotus, the largest independent club for Lotus owners, was born, and they're still going strong today. Club Lotus has around 8,000 members who come from a wide variety of backgrounds, but they all have one thing in common. They're all passionate about Lotus cars. Whether it's the looks, the speed, or the racing heritage, there's just something about these cars that catches the attention, very often at a very early age. A club for Lotus owners was first mentioned after the 1955 Earl's Court Motor Show. A letter was sent to all Lotus owners proposing a meeting in November to form a club. Between 40 and 50 owners attended, and Colin Chapman was persuaded to become president. No doubt there were benefits for Lotus in having direct communication with its customers. For their membership fee of £1 that's £1.05 in today's money, the club members would receive a monthly magazine, and here is a copy of the first one. January 1956, Volume 1, Number 1. By November 1956, they had graduated to a colour magazine. Club members could also buy their own Club Lotus badge to go on the front of their car. In the early days, there was great enthusiasm, just as there is today, and the social aspects of the club were a major plus factor. By 1957, the club boasted 250 members, and by the annual dinner in February of the following year, this had literally doubled. It was at this dinner, held on Tagg's Island in the River Thames, that club members Bill Frost and Ian Walker stunned everyone by driving onto the dance floor in a full racing Lotus 11. Despite this, Club Lotus was allowed back in 1959 when Hazel Chapman presented the John Coombs Trophy to Innes Island, and another car was driven onto the dance floor, this time by Team Lotus Grand Prix driver Cliff Allison to collect the Esso Trophy. During the following decade, contact with the factory was lost, and eventually the club went into decline. Not much was heard of it until it was resurrected by Graham Arnold, who was sales manager for Lotus cars in the 1970s. His drive and flair helped reignite this flame, so that the prestige and camaraderie that Club Lotus originally stood for would live again. Over the years, this exceedingly handsome chap had the good fortune to race Lotus cars, including a Lotus 11 like this one, the Lotus 11 GTs, and the fearsome Lotus 15 Buick V8 built by test pilot Dizzy Adicott. So the club grew, with many annual events and a new quarterly magazine like this one here. It continued in popularity for 30 years, until in November 2003, Graham Arnold sadly passed away. The reins were then picked up by the current chairman, Alan Morgan, who brought a wealth of experience from the motoring magazine sector, as well as his own passion for Lotus cars. Here's what he had to say when he took over in 2004.
I've been a Lotus fan all my life. I've owned lots of them. I've got lots of scars from fixing them. But love the cars and very pleased to be chairman of the club.
Each year the club continues to thrive and the months seem to fly by. It really is life in the fast lane. During the winter months, cars are worked on by dedicated owners, preparing them for the coming season's Club Lotus events. Springtime, when trees stop looking like sticks and there are places steeped in motoring history to visit. This active group of Club Lotus members from Dorset, Hampshire and Wiltshire don't like fine weather to go to waste. Besides, it's a good excuse to get out and drive a Lotus. Brooklands is unique, the world's first purpose-built motor circuit. It was constructed in Weybridge, Surrey by wealthy landowner Hugh Lock King in 1907 and was the birthplace of British motorsport. This giant 24-litre Napier Railton is just one of the many exhibits. and there's always an expert on hand to supply more details.
Hello, my name is Jack Dunn, and I'm sitting in a 1933 Duesenberg racing car that I drove regularly in the races at Brooklands between 1936 and 1939.
It's like stepping back in time to a much more civilised age, where the gentlemen relaxed after a hard day's racing with a game of billiards. And ladies were even allowed too, some more famous than others. The outdoor workshops recall well-known names from motor racing history. There's a wide range of attractions here, whether you're interested in early racing cars or the more modern Formula One scene. Area leader Ian Reimer checks out the memorabilia before rounding up the Club Lotus members for a photo shoot, while others take in the Brooklands movie experience.
Okay guys, we're going to go up to the banking now for a photo opportunity. So if you'd all like to get in your cars, we'll make our way to the banking.
Thank you.
The chance to have a picture of your Lotus on the atmospheric Brooklands embankment isn't one that comes along every day. At the last minute, video director Alan Patterson was coerced into arranging the shoot. He thought that an explanation up front might help.
The idea is to make it look like we've been filming the cars racing, coming round the bend. So we're going to stagger the cars. I don't know if you can see this. This is the shape of a widescreen picture. So we're having one car right in the foreground, then the next one staggered back a little bit so we can see the car clearly. Then the next one is down a little bit so we can see them. And they'll go back round the bend. And what I'm suggesting is we don't have one massive blue, one massive yellow, one massive red. We stagger the colours. So I'm suggesting we start with a red one, which is Ian's fag packet one there, or is that one there?
Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but pretty soon he discovered that organising Lotus owners is a bit like attempting to herd cats. It was also remarkably difficult to stay vertical on a banking that rises to over 30 feet in height. Come on guys, a bit closer. Whoops, almost went over. Eventually, with patience and perseverance, it paid off, producing a fine memento of the day. Ian Reimer explains the attraction of Brooklands.
You'd have to be here to appreciate and soak up the atmosphere, especially going up on the banking, thinking about the guys that used to race it and the women that used to race here all those years ago, and used to race what were quite dangerous. We would think were quite dangerous cars today with the old-fashioned brakes and steering and suspension. You really got to take your hat off to some of these guys. I've been a member of Club Lotus now for 6 years. I was a member for about a year when I decided that I would like to become an area leader. The nearest area that met to where I lived, which is in Poole in Dorset, was about 50 miles away, and it was really impractical to go that far. So I contacted Graham Arnold, then chairman of the club, and we started our local area, which is based in Dorset, Hampshire and Wiltshire. The events have been fantastic. We've been to places and seen things that you most probably wouldn't have thought of doing. We've been all over England. It's been really good. Bit of hard work, bit of organising, hoping that all the effort that you put in, and on the day it doesn't rain. Like today, we've been blessed with a lovely, cold but dry, sunny day. And it's just fun. Don't take it too seriously. We try and make it a social event. I don't like the idea it's just a whole load of guys propping up the bar talking about camshafts. Try and get the whole family involved. Just generally have a good time.
Having a good time means not damaging your Lotus on the way out. Fortunately, not too much fiberglass had to be swept up from the Brooklands banking. And the Club Lotus members left in a polite manner, so they could come back again. Track days are a highlight of the Club Lotus calendar. Chris Parker organises one for the Surrey section at Goodwood each year, and it begins with a thorough driver's briefing.
Right, well, welcome everybody. We've got a packed day as usual, lots of cars, lots of people. We've got 8 novices with us today. Now, overtaking rule is quite simply you overtake on the left only and only on the straights. And there's 3 straights. There's the pit straight, there's the Levant straight, and there's a straight coming out of Magic Corner over there. Now, you don't overtake until the vehicle in front of you has seen you. So don't push your way past thinking that they've got to see you.
Goodwood senior track steward Judy Derrisley, whose dad used to race a Lotus in the 60s, lays down the law and explains the flags.
No getting away with it. And they've got a bunch of flags each. The first one that you might see is the yellow flag. Now, for those of you that are familiar with racing terms, you probably know that this means slow down, no overtaking, there is a hazard on the track.
Before cars can be allowed on the track, they have to be tested to ensure they conform to the noise level regulations for the circuit. We can't have them disturbing the neighbours now, can we? Another one passes the test and receives his windscreen sticker. Then it's off to the track for him. And the next contestant, please. Arriving at the track, the queue in the pit lane is already starting to form, while others enjoy the newly renovated track surface. Goodwood is the only classic motor circuit in the world to remain in its original form, just as it was in the days of the great racing heroes from 1948 to 1966. Fangio, Brabham, Moss, Stewart, Hill and Clark all raced here. And now Club Lotus members take the opportunity to follow the same racing line. Let's see it from a driver's viewpoint. black JPS Europa is a track day regular, driven by Jeff Morgan.
Track days is the things I really enjoy doing. Goodwood, Castle Combe. Been on other sort of day trips and things like that, but my main interest is certainly getting the car on the track and using it to its abilities. The Lotus ideas of the lightweight, the handling, getting good performance, and the fact that Lotuses always seem to be sort of giant killers. I've always liked that kind of idea. Well, it's a car I've always admired, I've always liked, and I had an opportunity to buy one new in 1974, so I did, and I've had this car since then. Well, the car has evolved over the years. It's now got a new engine, a Vauxhall 2-litre engine, space frame chassis, uprated brakes, disc brakes all round, full roll cage, new gearbox, fairly extensively modified underneath the skin to make it more reliable and hopefully quicker. I think it surprises quite a few people with more modern cars, which is why I tried to keep the look on the outside of the car fairly standard, and all the work's gone on underneath. Always found other members helpful, supportive, particularly when you're going through the hard times of a rebuild. Always found them very supportive, and they try and tell you it's worthwhile, and it normally is. Most recently with the Elise and things like that, there's a lot more of those people turning up at the club. So there tends to be a sort of a classic Lotus section and a more modern Lotus section. But there's still a great bunch of people, so enjoying getting together, and certainly on the track days it's a good day because nobody's being silly, and they're good sensible people who enjoy driving their cars.
Could that be a few drops of rain? Surely not on a track day. It takes more than a bit of moisture to get these folks off the track. Now, a red flag, that's another matter. This means there's been an incident somewhere on the track, so it's time to head back to the paddock and wait for it to be cleared. From one well-known motor racing circuit to another, Darlington is the location for what, for some, is the event of the year. The cold weather didn't deter this group of hardy Scots from making the journey south for the annual Darlington show.
Great journey down this morning and that. Good weather for us. Bit cold, roof's off, but no, that's what it's all about, so good blast. Looking forward to some of the vintage stuff, of course, at the show this morning and that. Some of the older vehicles, etc. And the development of the marque of Lotus itself.
The show takes place over 2 days in March and provides a focal point where enthusiasts can meet up, see what's new and buy that elusive part for their car at special show prices. It's early on the first day and the exhibition hall is just beginning to fill up. Looks like the trip down from Scotland has already been worth it for one intrepid Lotus owner. 007's car was there, but the man himself must have been undercover. Some other well-known names put on a good show for visitors. Business was brisk on the Club Lotus stand, and we just couldn't stop the membership secretary from telling us what the club has to offer.
We have a quarterly magazine, deals with insurance, free technical advice, a directory of specialists who are always happy to help for technical queries, various shows and events going on throughout the year. And we're totally computerised now, which is a great benefit because I can find a lot more information for members' details and various cars that we can now trace.
It's nice to talk to members and it's nice to see them at the show so you can put a face to a voice on the telephone. So yeah, I do like Lotuses, yes, because when I originally joined it was just to put the database on computer. But yes, I have got an appreciation for them now. Elan Sprint is my favourite, yes, definitely.
Back inside, there's plenty to admire and to potentially empty most people's wallets. One of the stars of the show was the Lotus Etna prototype, currently undergoing restoration by its proud owner, Olaf Glacius.
The Lotus Etna was meant to be to put Lotus in the supercar league like Ferrari and Lamborghini, and this car was designed by Giugiaro in Italy, like the Esprit. It made its debut on the 1984 Birmingham International Motor Show. But soon after we had the big depression in Europe, so it never went into production. It stays as a prototype, so it's not a running car, and it was kept at the factory for many years. Then it went on to auction in 1998 at the Silverstone auction, and it was bought by Paul Matty, a well-known name in Lotus circles. And last year I bought it from Paul Matty, and I have the intention to make the car run, because the car never runs. It has an engine and gearbox, there's no wiring loom, there are no brakes, no cooling, no suspension. And I have Ken and Neil Myers in Northampton, who are very well known for their restorations, and they make the car now to a runner. And we also have the help of Alan Knobs of the Lotus factory, who worked on the design of the engine. So he knows everything about the engine. At the moment the engine is complete except for the fuel injection, and we will make it run in the next half year probably. It's a one of a kind, and I don't care about the value. It's just the only Lotus supercar ever made, and it's a nice addition to the collection, and it's nice that the car is kept and can be shown to the public and not hidden away somewhere.
While at the show, Olaf found some loose change in his pocket and purchased the M200 prototype, another subject for restoration. The Darlington car park is almost as interesting as the show itself, with one of the largest gatherings of Lotus vehicles in Europe. Almost every name beginning with the letter E can be found here. Elan, Esprit, Excel, Elite, Europa, Elise, Exige. Sorry, I sound like a train spotter. And here's another famous E from the collection of classic Team Lotus, who have attended the show in recent years, bringing a touch of excitement and enthusiasm from the heyday of the Lotus racing team.
Practice goes well. Their drivers are 1 and 2 on the grid. The other two take a rear seat. Only gravel on the track curves Jack.
One day, young man, one day. Over on the Coterie press stand, Jeremy Walton signs copies of his latest volume on the Lotus Esprit, and his enthusiasm for the marque rivals that of any owner. Just like the car, it's a beautiful creation that every Esprit fan will want to own. Jeremy tells us some of his own background that led him to the Esprit.
I trained as a journalist, did a full NUJ apprenticeship, did 2 years of journalism, learning the trade on such august journals as Poultry Farmer, Engineering World, and these kind of trade journals. And in the same building was a publication called Motor, a weekly. And I saw that a number of young men were driving Aston Martins, which they hadn't paid for. They were also driving Lotuses. And I felt that it would be a good idea if Jeremy turned his journalism qualifications into being a motoring journalist. It took me another year and a half to convince a journal to take me on. It was a then new journal called Cars and Car Conversions. It was for young men who were interested in hotting up Minis, but they also hotted up Lotuses as well. Not many of them made it from the test track back to the end of the week, but a Lotus Europa did. And I loved the car. It was a purple Lotus Europa, tuned by a company called Hermes, and they left me alone for an hour on the track with it to try and learn something about track driving. And it was just a wonderful experience, and it changed my life. And we were fortunate. Lotus was a small company then. The links were very easy. They would even fly us up to the factory. I graduated to Motoring News and Motorsport, which were more senior papers then. We had more access on the racing side as well. And I visited Lotus pretty regularly. One afternoon I went up with a legendary Grand Prix correspondent called Dennis Jenkinson. Jenkinson and Chapman got on extremely well. They wanted to get rid of the irksome boy in their company, so they said, would the boy like to drive a new Lotus, a brand new Lotus? This turned out, this was 1975, summer of 75, and it turned out to be a white Lotus Esprit. Chapman said, you'll be back pretty quickly, but enjoy it while you can. I did 5 laps, 5 glorious laps. Yes, it was harsh, it was noisy, but it was the most thrilling ride I'd been into to that date. And it showed the Lotus were making enormous progress. Much heartened, I carried on keeping an eye on Lotus, visiting the factory in the line of my work with various other magazines and TV companies. And I suppose I drove every type of Esprit up until about the mid-90s. The publisher of this book, William Taylor, is a great photographer in his own right, so we had access to superb original images. William is a great Lotus enthusiast, so he'd also collected a lot of Lotus memorabilia, brochures and those kind of things. And that meant that we could offer a 100% better book than I could have ever dreamt anywhere else.
And the spirit of the Esprit lives on. Here at the Club Lotus HQ in Dereham, Norfolk, is where much of the planning and preparation that makes the events a success takes place. It's here also that the editing, design and layout of the Club Lotus magazine is carried out. Articles from members are typeset and pictures carefully positioned before a new issue is sent to the printers in digital format. Improving members' benefits is a high priority, as Alan Morgan explains.
The first thing we looked at was improving the club magazine, because that was a fairly easy thing to improve on, I think. Although Graham had worked very hard at it over the years. But it needed more colour, it needed freshening, and it needed a redesign. It's very important, the magazine, because it's the one thing that all the members get. So it's a major benefit of joining the club. And it's a constant process of trying to improve it. And if people have got interesting stories, are doing interesting things with their cars, we want to know, and we'll cover it and reflect what's happening out there in the world of Lotus. Cheap insurance is never a good thing, and insurance is a bit of a grudge purchase, I guess, for most people, and you only really need it when things go wrong. Footman James, who I've known for many years, are very good when the worst happens, and they don't shirk on claims, and they're reasonable about paying out the right sort of money. However, you've got to be competitive, and it's a very competitive market. Lots of people are chasing the classic car business. So we had a few chats with them, and they've changed underwriters as a result. And I think we have brought the premiums down, and also at the same time added benefits.
In the office, 2 key figures from Lotus racing history are remembered, and one in particular evokes memories of many a winning season. Here in the Scottish village of Kilmeny in Fife, there stands a full-size statue to one of the greatest racing legends of Team Lotus. In his short life, Jim Clark was twice world champion and in 1965 won the Indianapolis 500. To say he was a great racing driver would be like saying that Einstein was a bit clever. Here at the classic Team Lotus workshops in Hethel, the memory of Jimmy Clark lives on in the hearts and minds of those who knew him. No more so than Bob Dance, the Team Lotus mechanic who worked most closely with him during the golden years. Bob recalls how they came to work together.
I saw Jim Clark from a distance at first, not actually working in the team, but my first year there he was driving a Formula Junior car, which was prepared in Lotus developments by a mechanic by the name of Mike Warren, and that was under the watchful eye of Mike Costin and Colin Chapman. The first race I actually went to was the 1,000-kilometre sports car race at Nürburgring in 1962. We went with a Lotus 23, which was nearly built, with perhaps a day of work to get it finished off and tidied up. It was being run by Mike Costin, and Jimmy Clark and Trevor Taylor were going to drive it in the race. Jimmy Clark always liked to sound out the new chaps who were working in the team. He'd probably go up to one of the regular members and say, "Who's he over there? What's his background, or where's he come from, or what's he doing?" But he was pleasant enough and friendly, and would pass the time of day, and slowly you became accepted in the group. He was calm and collected, and obviously one found out his ability from some of his earlier racing prior to joining Team Lotus, and he had a very good relationship with Colin Chapman and his mechanics in the Formula One team. Some people say he wasn't really that mechanically minded, but he didn't miss anything. He knew what was what, and he would point out something he might not be happy about. He wanted to know, it was assembled well, and he trusted the men who worked with him and with Colin. And they worked under quite a lot of pressure from Colin, and he was a good man to have as a buffer along the way. He wasn't hard on the cars, and we could measure this from the amount of fuel he used. He was light on his fuel, light on tyre wear, light on brake wear. He was a very smooth driver, and he didn't treat the machines roughly. He was respected by the other drivers. He was really used as the measure of performance at racetracks. If Jimmy Clark could go through a certain corner or a curve at a certain speed, then it would appear that that was the measure to aim at, and you knew that you were going to get 100% effort from the design side and the engineering side, which was Colin Chapman, and the driving side from Jim. So if a mechanic screwed the car together properly and all the right decisions had been made on the setup, you were going to be going places, which was highly encouraging. We used to send him off up to Scotland perhaps with a car which needed a decent road test, and I remember we did an independent rear suspension Lotus Cortina. Colin Chapman designed the rear end, and the Cortina racing team put Colin's design into operation, and we built the car, and we sent Jimmy off to Scotland with that. The only problem was, in the design of this car, it hadn't been possible to design a handbrake mechanism for it, and he found en route that he hadn't got any form of handbrake. He'd been sent off and of course, while he was up at home, and that he had to park sensibly or in gear everywhere he went.
On the 7th of April 1968, disaster struck at Hockenheim, when Jim Clark's car skidded on a patch of wet asphalt, causing him to crash. Jimmy was killed instantly. The Flying Scotsman would fly no more.
I was at Brands Hatch with the Lotus 47s running in the Boac race, and we got information coming to the pits. I think that via the late Shabby Cromback, who we saw in tears, and we wondered what was wrong with him. And he said that Jimmy had been killed at Hockenheim, which took us back more than a little. But we decided we should race on, because that in those days one carried on racing virtually irrespective of what happened at a race circuit. And in those days there were drivers injured or killed quite frequently. But it was obviously a terrible day for Lotus and his family and supporters. And Team Lotus would never be quite the same again. And I've been back since, of course. We went back to the 25th gathering, and last year Jimmy Clark's sisters came out to Hockenheim and were guests of the circuit there. So we're in touch with them, we don't forget them, and they were great times which people like to remember and talk about.
2006, and the Hockenheim circuit hosts the Jim Clark Revival.
2006, the Friday Grand Prix Championship, which starts in about 1995.
Classic Team Lotus have 2 Formula One cars running in their distinctive black and gold JPS livery, plus a Formula Junior Lotus Type 18. Clive Chapman explains why it was special for him.
Classic Team Lotus is very much customer driven, and as I explained to the organisers when they wanted us to participate, much as we did want to, it really relied upon some of our customers wanting to be there. Fortunately, it's a good meeting, and we were running 2 cars there, 3 cars in fact, and it was nice to be able to look at the quite impressive collection of Lotuses that have been gathered together. And the fact that it's called the Jim Clark Festival is really very nice.
In the pits, the Classic Team Lotus cars are prepared prior to the race by experienced mechanics, as tense owner drivers wait nervously in the background. Pit lane atmosphere amid roaring, snarling engines takes over as the cars wait to be ushered out onto the track. cars warm up on the Sachs curve, the glorious sound of those race-tuned engines provide a music track all of their own.
Finding it a great deal easier to drive quickly, although you've been trying very hard to keep the engine miles.
After a spirited performance, sadly there were no great wins to report for the Classic Team Lotus entrants this year. Although too young to have his own memories of Jim Clark, Clive Chapman explains how he has come to know the racing icon.
And what I know about Jimmy, the picture I have in my mind, is from other people, and they often say when someone dies they don't leave us. They continue on in other people's memories. Well, that's exactly what's happened for me. There is now a person called Jim Clark who I know purely through the recollection of people like my family and Bob Dance, and he was a very special person. I'm very happy that the owners of the circuit haven't forgotten Jimmy's memorial and have brought it into the confines of the new circuit. I think it's nice for the younger mechanics with Classic Team Lotus, local people who have joined with relatively little experience, some of whom now working on F1 cars and really knew nothing about Jim Clark when they joined, are with us on that occasion, and it really registers with them, and I think that's the most important aspect. All I know really is by association with his mechanics, and that's one of the nicest things about Classic Team Lotus from my point of view, is I'm working with the guys that worked with my father. And obviously I miss my father a lot, it's by working with these people, it's more than just the old cars. You actually get the human side of it. Going to races with Dad was always exciting. From the moment you got on the plane to fly off and then land and get the hire car and roar off to the circuit and then fight with the officials to get into the track because you never had any passes, and roar off to the hotel, and it was extremely exciting. In particular, when you got right into the core of it, and especially the debriefs at Grand Prix, sitting in the motorhome, kind of wedged between Dad and Mario, and then all the engineers are there, and you're in the inner sanctum, and everybody wants to be there, and it was so fascinating because they're all brilliant engineers and brilliant racing drivers, and totally focused, and there was no mucking about, and a lot of. Well, there was a lot of joking around, but no one was bullshitting anybody, basically, and that was fabulous. If you pour a glass of water onto a table, it just flows, and there's nothing to stop it. That was how his mind worked, really. There was just no limit, and he'd look in any direction and just head off. And people would say, "Well, hang on, why are we doing that?" And he'd say, "Well, why not?" We used to live in Norwich before we moved to East Carlton. One day Dad was coming along the road, and it was a cold and wintry morning, and he noticed there was a car overturned in the field, and the wheels were still spinning, and it was a Lotus, and he stopped the car and got out, and Roger Putnam, who was sales director at the time, was just crawling out of the car and kind of staggering around in the field, And Roger Putnam retold this story recently at the opening of the Hethel Engineering Centre. And I've always said that's why it's called Putnam's Leap, and our children know that, and every time we go over it, that's Putnam's Leap. And but Roger really threw the kind of knockout punch at the Hethel Engineering Centre opening when he said, and Colin's first words were, "Is that a company car, Roger?" And Roger couldn't quite believe it. And he said, "No." He said, "Right, well, I'll tell security." And Dad just got in the car and drove off, and that was it. And he was just focused, on things, and I guess he assumed, right, Roger's not hurt, and off he went. But there were times when one time in particular, when we flew off in the plane from Hethel, and Dad had forgotten something. So he said, "Right, I'll be back in a minute," and he had to go home. So he leapt in the car and roared off, and then about 20 minutes later came back, and we got on the plane and off we flew. I can't quite recall how it was, but none of us noticed that he came back in a different car to the one he'd set off in, and he'd got halfway through East Carlton and thrown it into a ditch, rung security come out, got him another car, he got the stuff from home, and then back again. He just never mentioned it, because he just didn't need to, so he didn't. And a lot of happy memories.
In the middle of May, Scottish Club Lotus members hold an annual Jim Clark Remembrance, which this year was attended by Bob Dance. A chance for many to find out firsthand what it was like to be part of the Lotus racing team.
From a personal point of view, these days when I travel about on a part-time basis with Classic Team Lotus, you get lots of people come up and remember the great days of the 60s, and that's it's very pleasant to remember those good times, and people come up with photographs and want to talk to you, and it's good for them, and it's probably good for me as well.
After the meet-up, there was a brisk cross-country convoy over undulating roads which led to the Jim Clark Room in the small town of Duns in the Scottish borders. The museum houses many of Jim Clark's trophies and other memorabilia, and is a mecca for motor racing enthusiasts. One of the highlights of the weekend was firing up and driving a Lotus 23 through the streets of Duns. Not the kind of thing they see too often in these parts. Bob Dance explains the interest shown by the local boys in blue.
I went with the police driver, which was quite an interesting ride, and he was enthusiastic about it all, and we just looked after so well. I think we saved some motorcyclists getting stopped for speeding. He got a radio call en route to Churnside to say that there were some motorcyclists going like bats out of hell, and he said, "Well, I'm sorry, I can't do anything about that. I've got all these Lotus people in tow."
Town of Duns, the convoy moved on to the Jim Clark Memorial in Churnside. This was designed by Ian Scott Watson, who was one of Jim's earliest supporters and records his many achievements. From there to the small churchyard where Jimmy is buried, and a fitting eulogy was read by Nigel Poole, a friend of the Jim Clark Room. At the windy graveside, Bob laid a wreath in memory of his fallen comrade, and recalled what another famous racing driver had once said.
Juan Manuel Fangio said, "To race is to live, and those who died racing perhaps knew how to live."
After the events of the weekend, it was time to leave. Carefully. The juxtaposition of the old with the new caused Bob to put forward his philosophy for a successful group.
The cars of the early Lotus years are far different to the ones of today, and it's nice to get a mix of all the people, and it's important that the new people take an interest in the history of the company, and the older people accept the newer clients and their machinery.
Back at the Classic Team Lotus HQ, work continues to restore and maintain the cars that are so much part of Lotus racing heritage.
I started Classic Team Lotus to look after my family's collection of cars that my father started gathering together some years before he died, and then the team carried on doing that, trying to retain the best chassis of each type made. And that was with the intention of looking after the collection, but also providing a commercial service to other owners, and in that way hopefully try and avoid the collection being a money pit, and ensure that it could carry on. We appreciate what Club Lotus is doing, and it's nice that Alan Morgan's got involved and is carrying on with the original team of people who do such a good job. I tend not to get particularly involved with the road cars because I'm so focused on the single-seaters, and we've got a collection of 20 cars, and we've got a dozen customers, and we're a small company, and it's pretty much hand-to-mouth really, not just from a financial point of view but from a time point of view also. And I think Classic Team Lotus is becoming more aware of its popularity as more and more people visit the website and send emails of encouragement and what have you, and that's great. And I suspect we'll get probably closer and closer with the clubs as maybe we become more aware of that level of enthusiasm that's out there, which I guess is how the clubs got set up in the first place. Although obviously Club Lotus, goes back to the very beginning, and it's great it's still going, and long may that continue.
Castle Combe race circuit in Wiltshire is just a wheel bearings throw from Bath, and one of the most anticipated events in the Club Lotus diary. For some, it's a golden opportunity to test not only their driving skill but also their car's performance, in a setting where they're unlikely to witness a flashing blue light in the rear view mirror. As with other tracks, noise regulations are strictly observed. Rupert Crook, a senior instructor at the Castle Combe Racing School, delivers a full briefing for track drivers to explain the rules and warn of the consequences of ignoring them.
Do be aware of that if it gets damp. We use Lotus Elises in the racing school, and all of us instructors who should know better have spun in the damp coming out of Old Paddock. It is, and you have to, so it's not just me. It is quite tricky in the damp. In the drive circuit, the only problem with it is if you get it wrong there, the Armco is less than 12 foot away from the side of the track. It can be expensive. You may well go infield, but there's also a marshal's post there, which is a very solid thing. We've had a number of cars hit that. Just be careful with it. In the drive circuit, it's very quick, but beware of it in the damp. And when the circuit gets wet, and it really is teeming down, there's plenty of grip. It's when it's half and half, so if it's just damp, just started drizzling, or it's starting to dry out and you're getting rain, that's the time you get a problem out there. Go well, go steady. Anything else, Alan?
I'm sure you've taken in what Rupert said. It's a very good briefing. It's okay at the moment. It's not raining, and I think there's probably a dry line out there, but do beware, it might sprinkle with rain this morning. The forecast is better after lunch, but we just want you to enjoy yourselves. Lotus are fabulous cars around the circuit. It's really what they were built for, of course. So don't have a great time, enjoy yourselves out there. And if you've got any questions, just come and see us.
There's no hanging around, and the track day drivers are soon on their way. This could be the spot or two of rain they were warned about. Despite the safety briefing, embarrassing moments have been known to happen due to an injection of track day over-enthusiasm. Now, does anyone remember what Rupert said about rain and a certain part of the track?
Do beware of that if it gets damp.
Well, here's what can happen.
Whoa! Missed it. I have absolutely no idea how that happened.
They all say that.
No idea. Well, there you go.
Just thought of it loose.
Yeah, it just suddenly lost it. I've no idea how that happened. Found some grass anyway.
With the weather on the turn, we find a group of Lotus elites huddled together for warmth. And one car in particular with a story to tell.
I've had this Lotus Elite now for almost 10 years. I bought it in 1997 from a guy in Holland. And I'd been looking for an Elite for many years, so I joined Club Lotus in 1996 to try and find out a bit about the cars, know what I should and shouldn't be looking out for. And it took me about a year to find the right car, and this is the one that I bought. This car had had only 3 previous owners when I bought it. A Dutch collector who'd had it for 10 years, a guy in Surrey who'd had it for about 8 years before that, and then Team Lotus itself, who had it built specially for the 1980 and 81 Grand Prix seasons when they were sponsored by Essex. Now, people are well used to seeing the Essex Turbo Esprit in Essex blue with the big red and silver stickers down the side. Well, this was an Essex Elite. It's a unique car that was built to provide 4-seater accommodation for Colin Chapman and the drivers during the Grand Prix weekends. So it was taken down to the circuits all around Europe and used as the Team Lotus 4-seater car. It had been well used by the previous owners, looked after but well used. So by the time I bought it, it had done over 90,000 miles, and the paintwork and the fiberglass was very old and shabby and full of gel cracks. So I used Robin Alabaster in Berkshire to get the fiberglass done. The trim, well, the leather, well, it's originally Connolly leather. Some of it just needed reconolizing and bringing the colour back, but others was well worn, so we replaced a few parts. Their contractor, Benchmark Leather in Battersea, did a good job on that. Peter Day has done some of the original work on the suspension and rubber. But I use Steve Williams, who's a Club Lotus guy, heritage guy down in Maidenhead, to do regular service work. Since I've had the car, we've done quite a lot of miles on it now. We like taking it abroad. We don't venture too far away from the coastline, but we've been to some of the northern French ports in Belgium. We've taken it through Holland. Again, we've actually taken it to some of the circuits where it was taken when it was brand new. So it's been on Zandvoort circuit to Silverstone and Brands. We're going to Belgium again this year. So we've done quite a few miles. We're hopefully taking it to Brittany as well. And then this September, we're actually taking it to the Isle of Man, where there's a classic car journey around the TT and the Gordon Bennett circuit. So we're looking forward to that as well. Club Lotus has got a few little niche groups as part of it, and Michael Marsh has formed the Elite and the Eclat Register. He tries to record the details of all the road-going Elites and Eclats that are left, and is compiling a book. And we try and organise that every year during the summer that we all have a get-together and a picnic, and for the last 2 years we've combined it with the Castle Combe event, so that there's lots of other events going on, lots of other things for people to look at, so that we get a couple of dozen Elites and Eclats together and people can swap notes and swap parts and have a generally nice social get-together.
As the rain became more persistent, umbrellas suddenly became more than fashion accessories. And the barbecue looked in danger of being put out. But did this dampen the British spirit? Not one bit. As the track day drivers queued for their laps of the circuit, we couldn't help but recall a Michael Fish-style weather forecast.
The forecast is better after lunch.
At least he's in good company. Sorry, Alan, what was that again?
The forecast is better after lunch.
Are we going to let a bit of water stop us? We've got windscreen wipers, haven't we? Let's get out on that there track. All too soon, it's time to come off. Oh well, at least the cafe did a roaring trade thanks to the rain. Some people are just a bit too keen. Another year over, it was time to go home in my own personal swimming pool. The Lotus Esprit is probably one of the most stunning supercars ever built, particularly so in the John Player special colours. The imagination of many a schoolboy was shaken, not stirred, when a certain white Series 1 car was driven off a jetty in Sardinia by the most famous secret agent of all time. The names Bond, James Bond, echoed through many a Lotus dealership. Now, 30 years on, the Esprit has a most loyal following, who meet up regularly in salubrious surroundings, even though the great British weather does its best to put a damper on things, again. While it's a chance to discuss technical issues, there's also the opportunity to arrive in style. After a fine lunch, it's the turn of Alan Morgan to extend the hand of friendship to the Esprit group.
At Club Lotus, we want to work more closely with you. And I think we've already got a few things under our belts. A lineup of Esprits at Stoneleigh last year that you all organised, Paul in particular, was absolutely spectacular. And for those of you who were driving, you actually weren't in the best place, because the best place was standing by the side watching you come in. It was just brilliant. I wish we'd had it on video, but it was really good.
The group also enjoys direct contact with the Lotus factory through Brian Angus and Jeff Davidson, here demonstrating a new gearshift refurbishment kit they've put together to help replace some of the ageing parts that have become worn over the years.
You just lost the positivity of your gear change. We did kit those cars as an experiment, and I think it will vouch that it was a...
I thought the gear change was okay until they told me that they couldn't get it in any gear and was struggling to drive it. And then when I got it back, it was like to change a few washers to improve the gear change that much is definitely worth the effort. I think the kit's well worth it. I thought I had quite a good gear change, and Dermot drove my car and said, yeah, gear change is quite good, and apparently it was absolutely terrible.
Try to make sure that,
after the technical seminar, it's time for the run.
See where you're going. But everybody should have a map.
Anybody need a map?
I hope. Your young fella's got a map, Mark. You don't need the map.
He can't read a bloody map. Do you know how I got here? Via Banbury. I'm not lying.
The Esprit is a car which causes people to stop in the middle of the road and stare. Small boys still say James Bond car as it goes by. But let's hear why one owner decided to buy one over any other car.
Well, I wanted an all-round performance car that was rare and striking, you know, gave me satisfaction in terms of its looks and its performance, but also was impressive to other people. I like a car that stands out from the crowd. Obviously, I, like others, had posters and pictures of them from when I was younger. So you kind of grow up with it, always desiring it, but then when you reach a certain age, you think, well, actually it's within my reach. So I wanted to upgrade to a car that was as good looking as this, but also had the handling and performance to match. I had sort of performance cars in the past, 300 brake horsepower Nissan 300ZX TT, but the handling was appalling. So this was one of those rare cars, a bit like other cars I had, where you wouldn't pull up next to the lights against another car of this sort, sort of cherished car. So I've kept it relatively standard as much as I can, and I've pretty much done most of the work myself. Mechanically, I've changed the brake discs front and back for EBC sports brakes with red stuff pads. We know that the brakes aren't particularly great, so I've tried to improve that where I can for potential track days. I've improved the brake lines, and the braided clutch cable. Fitted clear lenses, front and sides, to take away those orange bulbs, and fitted a K&N panel air filter with dump valve. So apart from that, the stereo system I've improved slightly as well. Joining Club Lotus was specific reason was to join a fraternity of members with more experience than I have, and learn a lot from them. So certainly, that's the best sort of passionate population of people who know more about Lotus than I do. Just to get advice, ask technical questions and queries, get their recommendations on what to do to the car, what not to do to the car, and also attend club events in the sort of summer months. Potentially wanted to take the car on the track, that's why I improved the brakes, sort of learn from like-minded people. And ultimately as well, there's a lot of club discounts through Club Lotus. The insurance, being a club member of Club Lotus, got me a good insurance deal. Considering it's classic car insurance and it's not using no claims bonus, it was a very good deal. And really, there's also a Surrey Club Lotus meet occasionally, which I intend to be attending as well. So it's a good route into the Lotus group.
While Club Lotus was celebrating its 50th year, changes were taking place here at the Lotus factory in Hethel. Mike Kimberley, who joined Lotus in 1969 and was CEO from 1983 to 1991, recently returned to Lotus after a 14-year gap, which included successful stints at General Motors, Jaguar and Lamborghini. He recalls very clearly the great days at Lotus with Colin Chapman.
When I joined Lotus, it was so dynamic, it was incredible. It was 7/24. If a project had to be done in that time, it was done. And it didn't matter whether people worked day and night, you'd bring in the food and fish and chips or whatever it was and keep people going. Life was hectic, and it was really life in the fast lane. And Formula One drove that. And Colin's innovative, creative genius and also what I shared with him, which was impatience, drove that as well. We both had the same impatience quotient, I believe. And that is that, you've got to, in this world today, it's very, very competitive in the car industry. It's very competitive everywhere. And you have to be fast to market, and you have to, as a small company, be lean and mean. So you've got to be able to do things quicker, faster, and more innovatively and creatively than the large companies do. And that's where Lotus has a win-win capability. Colin and I, we decided that the car company, small car companies, they're always cyclical. And even though we sell our cars, we design, develop, engineer and manufacture our own cars, and actually sell them to real people from Los Angeles to Tokyo, to Melbourne, Sydney, and all over the world. It was nevertheless, we considered in 1977, Colin and I, it was vital to broaden the base of the business. So we emulated Porsche and we set up Lotus Engineering's high technology consultancy. Setting up that engineering consultancy business was one of the best things we ever did because it broadened the business base of the company. And also we decided to emulate Colin's earlier success with the Lotus Cortina by producing, if you like, premier brand image products for other major OEMs and manufacturers. You remember the Lotus Cortina, famous in its day. And so one of the products that we developed was Chrysler Sunbeam, the Lotus Chrysler Sunbeam, won the 81 RAC World Rally Championship. We manufactured them at Lotus, we engineered them, manufactured them. And then we did the same again with the Lotus Omega, Lotus Carlton. We engineered it into the world's best four-door, five-seater supercar, 182 mile an hour potential, twin turbocharged, twin intercooled. Phenomenal vehicle. And today, I think it's retailing at, even at 8 years old, it's selling, with 10 years old, it's selling at 25% over what it used to sell at. So those were all the things that Lotus was doing when I was here last. When I came back, it was more of a just manufacturing cars company. What I'm looking at for the future, or I'd like to see, is Lotus moving back to being a three model range. car company. I'd like to see the engineering consultancy side of it, as I say, growing. And then at the same time, what I'd like to see is working with a major OEM on another one of those Lotus Cortinas. So a pretty ambitious set of programs, but over a 5 to 7 year period, obviously. During the GM ownership, Lotus carried out some massive contracts, engineering contracts for GM, and then they did the VX220, as you know. So if you're interfacing with a major OEM, you have to have an enormous number of interface connections. When you're a small company, you only have a couple. So I guess I would say today, at the moment, the company, from my perspective, isn't fast enough on its feet. And that's something that we are doing something about, and the whole team are doing something about, because, you know, it is Lotus is totally and utterly a people business. It's not only their commitment as well, it's their attitude. They want the company to succeed. They're determined. They've got that sort of enthusiasm and driving spirit. And what it needs is for us as management to make sure that it's fully motivated and recognised. I mean, it's the job of management to provide an environment and an atmosphere where Colin Chapman's spirit flourishes. In doing that, obviously, you need to invest quite heavily in new models, and you need to invest in R&D, and you need to invest in the company on a long-term basis. The key thing is a long-term basis. Now, today, when I look at the products that we've got the entry-level Elise, and then we've got the Exige, which is the next model up, which is the purest, high-performance, extreme sports car, which is absolutely mind-boggling to drive. I mean, they have to prize it away from me every weekend I drive it. I have to be honest, it's so exciting to drive and adrenaline boosting. But you always need a jewel in the crown, which is your image builder, and that was the Esprit. And for me, I find it disappointing, I guess, really, to see that the previous Esprit phased out and there wasn't a new Esprit coming in at the same time, because in normal business terms, that's what you would do in a car company. So today, it's a well-known fact that we are working on a replacement for that type of vehicle, a high-performance sports car. And I drive the mules every week, because, you know, it's absolutely vital that it is a Lotus, and it does meet all of the shall we say, Lotus DNA requirements of a real Lotus. Because of today's regulations in the world, you probably spend 60 to 70% of your time and your investment budget in meeting world legislation, especially American legislation. So, you know, we're working our way through that project and working on with it, but at the moment, that will still be some time coming to market. But nevertheless, it's on the go. And that, of course, is the brand image, if you like, jewel in the crown, as I said before. And, of course, it does help the company, because you have a larger margin and a higher price vehicle, always. And that's why you find some other marques at the moment, fairly famous marques, are doing well in the world as well, because they've concentrated on making sure that they go for those high brand image, high margins, at low volume. Our cars at the moment, the Elise and the Exige, they're so iconic that they're, in terms of their vehicle dynamics, that they're held up as the benchmark for the whole of the world's industry. And I know that the majority of OEMs, whether it's in Detroit, Tokyo, or down in Melbourne, all over the world and in Europe, they've all got Elises and Exiges, because it is such a good product in terms of its achievement of that purest sports car capability and the tremendous enjoyment that it gives to the owners.
In mid-2006, Lotus launched its new sports Grand Tourer upon the motoring world. With a 2-litre turbocharged engine, the Europa S is capable of 0 to 60 in 5.6 seconds. exhilaration of Lotus handling and performance, combined with a modicum of practicality, open up new markets for the Lotus brand. A striking, poised car with enhanced comfort levels, it's aimed fairly and squarely at the lifestyle sector. It's a tall order to replace a vehicle with such an evocative name as Europa, and we wondered what Colin Chapman would have thought of it.
Working for Colin, he was a fabulous mentor, and he was the sort of individual that was most creative and innovative that the world's ever seen, I think, in the automotive industry. And he would have been proud of something like the Europa, because what it does, it actually takes the Elise and it actually turns it into more into the direction of a GT type of product. Easier egress and ingress, a little softer in terms of its general feel. But that's deliberate and aimed at, should we say, expanding more into what you and I would call more of the lifestyle type of market, which of course is about 3 to 5 times larger than a purist sports car, which of course our Elises and our Exiges are. I am very, very pleased to say that coming back to Lotus after 12 years away, that I've never seen such high quality, high reliability vehicles ever been built by Lotus, and I'm very proud of them. I would say that Club Lotus itself has been definitely consistently very, very much a superb ambassador for Lotus, and it can also help us very much by feeding back an outside perspective of Lotus, and that's very, very important. You know, sometimes people in the wood don't see the wood for the trees. And I always believe it's vitally important to look at the company from outside the box as well as from inside. And as far as I'm concerned, I'd like to say a very heartfelt thank you for that continuous support through lousy times, rough times, as well as some good times. And I'd like to see it be a lot closer relationship in the future.
With the backing of the man at the top and the support of Club Lotus members, things look set for a bright future. Amid a spell of very un-British weather, the historic Lotus Club held its annual drive-in and social meet at Oakley Hall near Basingstoke in Hampshire. What better way to spend a lazy Sunday afternoon than with a gourmet lunch followed by the chance to get close up and personal with Lotus cars from the 1950s onwards. As the sun shone down, memories of Castle Combe in the rain faded into obscurity. Club Lotus chairman Alan Morgan arrived in his Excel to soak up the sunshine and admire the wide range of cars. Cream teas and classic cars proved the perfect combination in the most genteel of genteel locations. Some people just can't resist the chance to live out boyhood dreams.
Depends if it was on fire or not.
Yeah. That dashboard, red letter on it. Look intelligent, all right?
No, cheating.
Well, he got in okay, but will he be able to get out?
Only for real Formula One drivers.
I never tried one of those.
I know.
Throughout the afternoon, the topics of conversation varied. Clearly, the Lotus Mark I is under discussion here. Pretty soon, the peace and tranquility of Oakley Hall was to be devastated as the boy racers of yesteryear turned it into the Hampshire equivalent of Southend on a Saturday night. The racers had full use of the extensive secluded grounds within the estate, a chance to show off in the sunshine. At some points it became a bit hairy out there. You have to come in sooner or later, but at least rain didn't stop play today. Let's hope it's just as nice next year. Romney Pageant of Motoring, the biggest one-day classic car show in the world. With over 3,000 exhibitors, 300 trade and auto jumble stands, arena entertainments, club stands and special displays, there's something for everyone to enjoy. Visitors come from far and wide to enjoy the attractions, the food, the classics, as well as the exercise. In the middle of Norman Park, we find the Club Lotus stand, where members from more than one area have come together to let the public know that this is their 50th anniversary, with an exhibition of some rare and well looked after Lotus models. Beside the Alans, a group of members take time out for that well-known Club Lotus pastime, a bit of grub and a chat. It's tough, but someone has to do it. The more modern Lotus cars take their place alongside the classic vehicles, giving onlookers something special to photograph. With so many classic Lotus owners present, it would be a shame to pass up the chance to find out the attraction of the cars.
I've owned the car since 1989. I bought it mainly because I'd owned Lotuses in my youth and got to a point where I could afford one again and enjoyed the added interest in life. It was repainted by the late Mick Miller in 1991. The Surrey Club has quite an active social side where we go off for trips, and it's very often useful because these cars are getting fairly long in the tooth now and a little bit specialised. It's very often useful to talk to other people who have had experiences of difficulties with them. Usually at Goodwood once a year with Chris Parker's Goodwood Track Day. A lot of fun.
Fun seems to be a fairly common phrase among Lotus owners, but let's not just take the word of one owner.
Right from the start, when they first came out, I thought they were a lovely car, and we got to a point in life with the children off our hands where we could think about a fun car, and it was the first one that came to mind that I really wanted to own. So I bought this one when it was just 2 years old. So I've had it 13 years now. It's such a great car because it's got really two personalities. You know, it's my everyday driver, it's reliable, you can go shopping in it, and it'll tootle around when you want it to. But it's got such superb both performance and handling when you want to be a bit of a hooligan that it's really, really great. So it's got this dual personality, and it's just so enjoyable to drive fast. But if you're not feeling that way inclined, it's a very civilised everyday car. I have it serviced once a year by Lakeside Engineering, and they do you know, the significant things on it. But really it's been incredibly reliable. It's nice to meet up with people both with M100s and with the old Drill-Ans. You get camaraderie, you get the fact that there's always somebody at the end of a phone who'll answer your silly questions. You can call on all that experience, plus the fact that they organise really good events. I'm a regular at track days with the Surrey section at Goodwood, which is a fantastic day out, real huge fun. I braked too early for woodcut at Goodwood, realised I was going too slowly, went back on the power, then back on the brakes, got the whole thing unbalanced, and it went round. That was quite frightening because you're going quite fast in these things when they let go. And I half spun at Lavant a couple of years ago, went through 180 degrees, and I'm not quite sure why that happened. I really still to this day don't quite sure why it happened.
Now, where have we heard that before? Time for Club Lotus to put on a bit of a show in the arena.
The chairman of Club Lotus, which is the world's biggest Lotus club, that's the end of the blow. But yeah, we cater for every Lotus, right from the earliest cars through to the current Eglease and Egg-Siege range, which is fabulous. But what we have coming into the ring now are some of the earlier examples, more or less in date order, and they kind of follow a theme. We're starting off with 3 cars from the Elite Eclat Excel series. Which,
now, you'll have to explain that. I know about Elite, I know about Eclats, or Eclats as people tend to call them, but which is which came first, and what have they got in the front?
Well, they've all got the Lotus engine, which was derived from Vauxhall block. Colin Chapman was always one to take a shortcut, and if he called it the Eclat Excel, he didn't have to get type approval on it, so hence it's got 2 names. Very rare, only made for a short time before it was developed into the Excel, which is the dark green one following it.
Over on the other side of the showground, we find a display on behalf of the proposed Colin Chapman Lotus Museum on the site of the original factory. The gentleman in the rather stylish headgear is John Scott Davies, here demonstrating his own hand-built Mark VI replica to the Classic Cars journalist.
As a non-engineer,
I didn't understand.
It's John's obvious enthusiasm that has been the main driving force behind the museum project. So let's transport ourselves to number 7 Tottenham Lane in Hornsey, North London, where it all began, to see and hear what he has in mind.
Behind me is the Wishing Well Public House, which in the 1950s was called the Railway Hotel and owned by Stan Chapman, Colin's father. To the left-hand side are the stable blocks that were owned by Stan and given to Colin for the purpose of the manufacture of the Lotus cars. This block is now owned by Jewson's. On the Jewson site, we hope to construct the Colin Chapman Lotus Museum and Education Centre. We propose raising money through charity, financing, lottery and European money. Now, let's go and have a look round. Here we're standing inside the stable block that Colin Chapman's father gave to Colin to produce a series production of the early Lotus models. By the time that Colin had come to the stable block, he'd already made the Mark I and Mark II and had some considerable success with the Mark III in racing. Here we can see the area where possibly the Mark VI was made, and that would lead on to the streamlined cars, the Mark VIII and Mark IX, and in the other building that we'll look at, probably the Mark XI and Mark XII. In a moment, I'd like to take you through the rest of the building, the famous showroom and office part of the building that the Lotus Elite was often seen at. If we may now, we'll follow through into the other building. We're now standing in the main showroom and office building that Colin Chapman constructed in the late 1950s. Below us is the showroom area that the Lotus Elite was presented in, and this is the area on the first floor where the draftsman would have designed the components for the Elite and certainly the Lotus 7 Series 1. Shortly from this building, Colin would have conducted the strategy that would lead to the success in Grand Prix racing through the 1960s. And of course, the component aspect of Lotus cars that Colin pioneered would have been developed at these premises. Colin's personal offices were across the landing in the room over there. Here we are in May 2006, standing in the very office where 50 years ago Colin Chapman would have directed the operation of Lotus cars. From this office he would have had the influence over the racing internationally and the manufacture of his production cars and component cars. Colin was always at the forefront of technology and engaged some of the best people in the industry. And although these computers wouldn't have been available, Colin was one of the first to embrace high levels of scientific input, particularly borrowing ideas from the aircraft industry. Frank Costin would have worked on his drawing board and with a slide rule to produce the cars that had the scientific edge and aerodynamic advantage over his competitors. This is the building in which the Mark 11s and the Mark 12 were constructed. There are several photographs that we know that show Colin Chapman supervising the construction of the single-seater 12 in this area here. Also, other photographs indicate the Lotus 11 in the process of construction, and from the beams it is probable that the engines were supported and dropped into the cars. Other photographs show the materials, the raw materials, including the tube, etc., that was used to weld the chassis. The mechanics are shown often in sequence, and the cars in various states of construction. I believe on the first floor above us was the stores area that contained the variety of components that constructed the cars. We're standing behind the Lotus 11 building, and just to my left-hand side you can see a small overgrown area. We hope to convert this to a memorial garden as a tribute to Colin Chapman when the Lotus Colin Chapman Museum and Education Centre are established here in Hornsey. Within the memorial garden we hope to have a mosaic and a bust of Colin Chapman so people can sit and reflect on the achievements and inspiration of Colin Chapman and his cars. Behind me you can see the stable block that Colin's father gave to Colin in order to construct the early Lotus cars. But in front of me is the block that Colin constructed himself in order to continue the business and expand. We should draw attention to the plaque that was placed here by Club Lotus in order to commemorate Colin's life and achievements.
In October 2006, John obtained planning permission from Haringey Council, so the museum project has now moved up a gear on the road towards becoming a reality. As the trees began to lose their leaves, Club Lotus members sped their way to Stoneleigh in Warwickshire for the annual parts fair. Those well-organised Esprit owners had arranged undercover parking for their most prized possessions. Now that's just showing off. Whose fence was this liberated from? Well, we can't have Esprits going over bumps, now can we? Inside, the Club Lotus stand is preparing to be deluged with customers. Just what is she doing to that poor woman? At Club Lotus events, you never seem to be too far from a Formula One car. Colourful Brian Angus from the Lotus factory talks technical to some Esprit owners. Business is hotting up on the various stands. This is the place to come to find almost any kind of fastener for your Lotus. A very unusual colour scheme is guaranteed to catch the eye of visitors. The featured car at this year's show is the Lotus Elan, with a large number being exhibited. Above all, this is a people place. Remember the Esprit Turbo in the Bond film For Your Eyes Only? Well, here's one in that same rare copper colour scheme. The new Europa S makes its first appearance at the Club Lotus event. There's no escape for Brian and Jeff from the factory. Although Jeff did retire from Lotus shortly after the Stoneleigh event, he'll be back when he gets bored. Time to judge the best car of the show, with Brian Buckland in charge. He doesn't half get about. Time for the prize giving. And first place went to Alan Mead, the owner of this stunning white Elan S4 SE, which had been resprayed by the late Mick Miller. Highly commended awards went to Howard Walters and Martin West. Howard is the proud owner of a superb shiny Elan Sprint, resplendent in gold leaf colours. And Brian Buckland gives some good advice to Martin.
Look after it. Drive it on the road. Don't put it in a garage. Well done.
Show over, the exhibits and trade stands move out. The show has been a great success and a fitting end to the Club Lotus 50th anniversary year. As the cars head for home, many with new parts bought at the show, the owners are already planning winter evenings in their garages, while their better halves watch Coronation Street indoors, safe in the knowledge that at least they know where their menfolk are. After half a century, the enthusiasm, prestige and camaraderie among Club Lotus members that existed in the beginning is undeniably still a major force today. The beauty of the cars, the thrill of the handling, the Lotus DNA, all combine to produce a shared experience amongst those who own or who would like to own an example of British ingenuity and engineering. Whether you're excited by the cars of the past, the cars of today, or the cars of the future, Club Lotus helps you live life in the fast lane.
At the club, we're always interested in improving things for the members because that's why the club exists. And the road to success is always under construction. And that, I guess, is our philosophy. So please do talk to us. Do let us know, and we're all out there to enjoy the cars. That's the most important thing. Get out there and enjoy your Lotus.
car's nearly 25 years old, and the shape of it just looks as though it was manufactured yesterday.
Anybody that owns these cars are spoilt to bits.
Probably the most fun you can have with your clothes on.
They are a British sports car, uniquely a British supercar, and very different from the rest.
It's really an addiction for life.